We're going to begin, because I believe we're slightly starting a bit over time. My name is Nafeez Ahmed. This panel is all about innovation and sustainability. And I have 4 distinguished panelists who I'll introduce after a short presentation. What I'm going to do first of all, however, is set the scene by discussing some of the big technology trends going on right now and where they're going to take us. Now, a little bit about me. I'm a systems theorist and a futurist, and I've predicted over the last 20 years some of the biggest events in recent history. For instance, I predicted the war on Afghanistan before 9/11. I predicted the 2008 financial crash a month before Nouriel Roubini, actually. And I predicted the breakup of Europe before Brexit. Why am I blowing my own horn like this? You'll forgive me. It's just to add credibility to what I'm about to say now, which is I believe that we're on the cusp of the beginning of a whole new life cycle for civilization. Every foundational sector of the global economy, energy, transport, food, information, and materials, is in the throes of the greatest, fastest, and most disruptive transformation in history. If we don't understand this transformation, we will be left behind. But if we do, we can mitigate the risks and we can move forward to a new era of prosperity and abundance. So you probably are aware of the International Energy Agency's World Energy Outlook flagship report that came out a few weeks ago, which said that fossil fuel demand is probably going to peak by around 2030. And then they said after that, it's going to enter this kind of gradual plateau and decline. And the basis of this prediction was this big technological disruption that's taking place right now with renewable energy and electric vehicles and so on and so forth, which the IEA said is really taking off, and it's going to take a big chunk out of the incumbent energy system. But here's the thing. The IEA has been wrong for 20 years. But what do I mean by that? Well, if you look at the blue lines on the right-hand side, those are the predictions of the World Energy Outlook every year for the last 20 years of renewable energy, and they've always been wrong. In what sense? They've always been too slow. The real trajectory of renewables has always scaled exponentially according to the red line and much faster than conventional analysts anticipate. So I believe that the IEA's latest forecast, while definitely progress in terms of its forecasting ability, is still too conservative. I do think that we are looking at the inevitable decline of fossil fuels, and that's something I think we've heard a lot about in the run-up to COP. And I think it's being driven by 2 factors. One is internal, and I'll quickly explain what I think the key internal dynamics are. Have you heard of the concept of energy return on investment? Please don't be shy. Put your hand up if you've heard of that concept. Well, fantastic. We have as many as a single hand, I think, maybe 5 people maximum have heard of that. So that's testament, I think, to the lack of understanding of a really key concept in understanding energy. Now, that diagram looks super complicated, but it's a really, really simple idea. It's a simple ratio. How do you measure how much energy you use to get a certain amount of energy out? So obviously, you want to put a little bit in and get loads out. But the more energy you need to put into a system to get the energy out, obviously the quality of your energy then is declining. Now, what some scientists have found is that since around the 1960s, the EROI value of fossil fuels overall worldwide essentially reached a maximum and has since then began to decline, roughly by half over the last few decades. Looking specifically at oil, French scientists published a study looking at, I'd like you to focus attention on the graph on the right, where they tried to look at how much energy is going to be used just to get the oil out. And they found that by 2030, it will be about 30%. By 2050, you'll be using about 50% of the energy from oil just to get more oil out. Now, this is economically not sustainable. Forget anything else. Which means that that decline, which the IEA hasn't really factored in EROI into its calculations, is probably going to be a lot faster than we think. But the second disruptive factor here is those technology disruptions that the IEA mentioned, which I think the IEA has underestimated them, as it has in the past. And that's because disruptions are generally really, really fast. And if you look at the pattern of history and disruptive innovations going back hundreds of years, it usually happens in a matter of decades. These two iconic photographs compare what happened with horses and cars. So obviously horses were the dominant mode of transport for millennia for human species. There was a time when if you'd said there'd be something that replaces it, you'd be laughed out of the room. And that photograph, the first photograph shows, you don't see hardly any, cars on the road. But in 13 years, the disruption of horses by the car literally wiped out horses from the streets of New York. Just 13 years. It was massive disruption, unstoppable. So disruptions generally happen according to a non-linear trajectory. They're exponential. The other key thing I want you guys to remember is that technology disruptions, sometimes they're seen as substitutions. You take one technology and you slot in another technology and the system stays the same. But it doesn't work like that. Technologies change systems. They bring new rules, properties, and dynamics. And they generally create whole new systems. That's really significant because what's happening right now is, as I said, every sector of the economy is experiencing disruption. And some of the key disruptions are taking place in energy, transport, and food, which account for about 90% of global carbon emissions. So the energy revolution, of course, is exponential. We know this. Renewable energy costs are declining exponentially, and that increasing economic competitiveness is what is driving the exponential adoption rates. Solar, wind, batteries, and so on and so forth. This is leading to the emergence, according to Oxford University forecasters, of a whole new energy system, which by around 2040 or 2050, depending on whether we delay or accelerate the choices that we make, that system is going to come into being, and it's going to be likely around 5 to 10 times cheaper, again, depending on the choices that we make. But that could save us trillions of dollars. The other interesting thing is that, this EROI figures that I mentioned before, well, with these technologies, they tend to be improving rather than declining. This is just an empirical fact. We need to take this into account when we're making decisions. And this is something that really excites me. An obscure study that the International Energy Agency published earlier this year, its photovoltaic power systems program, they found that there's this real amazing trick with how you deploy your renewable system, because you can make different choices. You can do it in one way and do it in another. What they found is that if you supersize your generating capacity, you build out solar wind by 3 times demand, then your battery storage requirements are much, much smaller. In fact, you can reduce it by about 90%. Batteries are the most expensive component of the system, also the most intensive in terms of critical minerals. That reduces that requirement by 90%, and it reduces the system costs by about 80%. So that's the best way to optimize your renewable system. And here's the counterintuitive implication. It means that with a cheaper cost system, you could actually generate more energy. A lot of energy scientists were looking at this and saying, we have to curtail all of that surplus electricity. But then some scientists said, no, don't curtail it. Let's expand the grid and find ways to use that excess electricity. We can use it to purify water, for desalination, for irrigation, and you can also use it for other things such as industry, recycling, the circular economy. Swiss scientists tried to apply this idea on a global scale, and they concluded that we could potentially, if we incorporate the world's deserts, generate as much as 10 times the amount of energy that we're producing today within planetary boundaries. Absolutely extraordinary. So we're moving into this possibility of abundance in a way that we've never anticipated. The transport revolution is also exponential. We can see that we have these costs exponentially declining, and the adoption rates are exponentially growing again. But the other kind of wild card here is in self-driving technology. It's not quite there yet. We're hearing all the news reports about accidents and things like that. But if you look at the technology and its rate of improvement, it looks quite plausible that by around 2035, we're going to get level 4 autonomous vehicles road ready, which is also extraordinary, because what does that mean? Well, that could accelerate the emergence of a new model called transport as a service, where it will be cheaper to order your autonomous vehicle to arrive at your doorstep at the push of a button than to own an individual car yourself, which means we could see private ownership of vehicles plummet while transport as a service companies grow very, very fast. So there's all sorts of these counterintuitive implications that are coming. Similarly, with the food transition, also exponential. The biggest driver is this thing called precision fermentation. We can now program microorganisms to produce any protein just with inputs of carbohydrate and nitrogen. And combined with cellular agriculture, we're seeing the same trends: declining costs, exponential adoption. What does it mean? Well, we know that the market share is already booming, and if that continues, it's likely to take over. We're already using precision fermentation for key ingredients in foods. Within a matter of, I believe, the next decade or so, we are likely to see the livestock industry fundamentally disrupted by precision fermentation and cellular agriculture, because it's just far more efficient and far cheaper. And what that means is that anywhere that you can brew beer, you can basically create proteins, and far more cheaply than you can do with kind of grazing cows, which is extraordinary. It's a whole extraordinary new world that's emerging. And there's another counterintuitive implication of that, because if you free up all of that land that's currently dedicated to the livestock industry, that's 2.7 billion hectares of land that could be available for all sorts of things like rewilding, reforestation, regenerative agriculture, carbon sequestration through natural means. It's a whole new world. But all of that together is going to create these self-reinforcing dynamics which accelerates things. And on top of that, you've got the information disruption, which we already know about in our lifetimes, that these things can happen within a matter of a decade to 15 years. We're seeing it in AI, and it's just on the cusp. The costs of training a ChatGPT-3 model are going to plummet to double digits. A similar thing is happening with the cost of processing queries. From $1 billion to do 1 billion inferences, it's just like $300. That AI disruption is also going to further compound the other disruptions that I've just described and accelerate them even more. So what that means is that big changes are coming. I call it a global phase shift. But here's the rub. With all of that speed, all of that exponentialness, and I've used that word so many times, it's not fast enough. We still are in the climate danger zone. The current annual renewable growth rate is 0.6 to 0.8%. We need to at least double or triple that in order to have a hope of staying within the 1.5C safe limit. So technological disruptions, they can't really be stopped, but they can be delayed and they can be accelerated. If we delay too much, then we could see a situation where the old system collapses before we break through to a new system. The other alternative is that we break through to a suboptimal new system that's badly designed, not very well rolled out, not thought out properly, not optimized, and so it ends up collapsing anyway in a slow, protracted, chaotic process. We need to shoot for the third option, break through to a new system with a new organizing structure. One of the things that my colleagues at the think tank I used to work at, Rethink X, had pointed out is that historically, civilizations only break through if they evolve a new organizing system. Technology is not what can save us in the end. It's definitely a powerful tool to get us there. But the only civilizations that make it through are the ones that can adapt their governance, their laws, their economics, their worldview, and their values to these new technological capabilities. So that's what we need. We need both. We need technology, all the best that we can, and we need an advancement of culture and civilization. If we achieve that, we could genuinely build a world in which we have abundant clean energy, 10 times cheaper, abundant food, transport, education, information widely available. It can be a world that we could never have imagined in our wildest dreams. That's what's possible. We have everything to play for. We just need to make the right choices.